The day they buried my husband, the sky refused to make up its mind. The morning began with a pale sun, then turned gray, as if the heavens themselves couldn't decide whether to mourn or stay indifferent. Inside the small chapel of the Fairview Funeral Home, everything smelled of lilies and dust. The air was too heavy to breathe, and the silence between sobs felt like a weight pressing on my chest. I sat in the first pew, hands folded over my lap, watching the casket as if I could still will it to open. After 40 years together, I thought I knew every corner of Elijah's soul, every sigh, every pause, every shadow behind his calm eyes. But that morning, a strange thought crept in. Perhaps I had known the man, but not the story. Our son Marcus sat beside me, rigid, holding his wife's hand. Vanessa, 32, perfectly composed even in grief, black dress pressed to perfection, her hair pinned like someone preparing for a photograph. She looked beautiful and distant, the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. When the pastor began his words about eternal rest, my mind drifted away from the sermon. I counted breaths, not blessings. The organ hummed softly, the candles flickered in sync with the rhythm of my pulse. I didn't notice Vanessa rise from her seat until she was already standing beside the coffin. She leaned forward, her gloved hand brushing the lapel of Elijah's navy suit. Her lips moved, whispering something no one else could hear. I thought she was saying goodbye, but then, with a movement so small it could have been missed by anyone not looking, she slipped her hand into his inner jacket pocket. When she drew it back, her fingers were empty, but something inside the fabric had changed. My breath caught. For a moment, I doubted my own eyes. Maybe it was grief playing tricks on me, I told myself. Maybe it was just a tissue, a note, a keepsake. But her face, calm, deliberate, almost cold, told a different story. She stepped back, exhaled, and looked toward Marcus. That look wasn't mourning. It was completion. The pastor's voice became distant, words dissolving into the hum of air conditioning and sniffles. All I could see was that quick, secret motion. Her hand, my husband's pocket, the final act of a play I didn't know I was in. When the service ended, the guests moved to the reception hall for coffee and condolences. I stayed behind. Alone with the coffin, the silence around me was thick enough to hear the faint creak of wood. The smell of melting candle wax mixed with polished mahogany and old perfume. "Elijah," I whispered, my fingers tracing the smooth edge of the casket. "What did she leave with you?" Before I could think better of it, I reached forward. My hand trembled as I slipped it into his jacket pocket, the same place Vanessa had touched. There was something there, something hard and flat. I pulled it out carefully. A white envelope. My name written across it in Elijah's handwriting. Celeste. The world narrowed to that single word. My heart stopped for a beat, then began again with a painful thud. I looked around the chapel, no one in sight. I slipped the envelope into my purse, pretending to fix my black scarf. Moments later, the attendants came in to close the casket. The sound of the lid shutting echoed like a gunshot. On the drive home, I stared out the car window as the landscape blurred into gray. Marcus and Vanessa sat in silence. She rested her hand lightly on his arm, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I wondered if she could feel my stare in the reflection of the glass. When we reached the house, they left me at the porch with the kind of politeness reserved for strangers. The minute the door closed behind me, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The house smelled like fading flowers and emptiness. Every photograph on the wall seemed to watch me, waiting. I placed my purse on the dining table. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it, afraid to open it, afraid not to. The clock ticked louder with every second, counting down to something I didn't yet understand. Finally, I sat down. My fingers hovered over the clasp of my purse. One deep breath, then another. I pulled out the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, clean, Elijah's. Inside was a single sheet of paper and something metallic, a small silver key, cold against my palm. The note read, "Celeste, if you are reading this, what you believed was yours never was. Trust no one." I read it once, then twice, each word heavier than the last. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with ghosts. I held the key against my chest, my heart pounding beneath it like a drum, calling me somewhere I didn't want to go. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. That night, I didn't sleep, and when I finally closed my eyes, I saw only one thing, Vanessa's hand disappearing into the darkness of the coffin and the secret my husband took with him. The house had never been that quiet, not even on the nights Elijah worked late or when Marcus left for college. There was always something alive in the air. The hum of his old radio, the clinking of a spoon against his coffee cup, the sound of his footsteps pacing the hall while he rehearsed a presentation. That night, there was nothing, only the ticking of the wall clock, deliberate and cruel, counting each second since I last heard his voice. I sat at the dining table, the envelope open before me, the silver key lying beside it. It caught the light from the lamp and threw a pale reflection on the ceiling. For a while, I stared at that shimmer, thinking about what the note said. What you believed was yours never was. The words crawled under my skin like frost. What could he possibly mean? Our marriage, the house, the life we built together? Or was he talking about Marcus? I pushed that thought away, ashamed for even thinking it. But once a doubt plants itself, it spreads like mold, silent, patient, unstoppable. The sound of the refrigerator compressor kicking on startled me. I laughed, short and bitter. "I'm losing my mind," I said to the empty room. I unfolded the letter again, tracing the handwriting. It was unmistakably Elijah's, the same sharp slant, the same deliberate strokes. I'd watched him write thousands of prescriptions, thank you notes, grocery lists. He was precise, always. But this felt like something written in fear. The key rested cold in my palm, silver, old-fashioned, numbered 47. It didn't belong to anything in the house. Elijah was the kind of man who labeled every drawer. He hated mysteries. And yet, he left me one. I walked into his study. Everything was still in its place. His desk immaculate, the shelves perfectly arranged. His smell lingered, paper, ink, and the faint trace of tobacco. On the desk, a stack of medical journals sat neatly aligned. I opened the top drawer. Receipts, pens, nothing more. The second drawer, files, a half-used bottle of cough syrup. The last one, locked. I tried the key. It didn't fit. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't grief anymore. It was curiosity with teeth. Whatever Elijah meant, he wanted me to find it. And if Vanessa had placed the envelope in his pocket, then she knew about it too. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling as I lifted it. Outside, the streetlights flickered, washing the porch in a yellow glow. The wind moved the curtain slightly, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing outside. When I looked again, there was nothing. The phone rang. I jumped so hard I spilled the water. "Mom?" Marcus's voice, soft, tired. "We just got home. You okay?" I looked at the letter. "Yes," I lied. "Just a long day." "Vanessa wanted to check in. She said you looked pale at the service." "I'm fine, Marcus. Tell her thank you." A pause. "She's having a hard time too, you know." "I'm sure she is," I said quietly. "Good night, son." When I hung up, I realized I hadn't said I love you. The words caught in my throat, thick and sour. The house pressed in on me again, too still, too full of ghosts. I turned on the small TV in the living room just to hear another voice, but even the late-night commercial sounded hollow. The key sat on the table, gleaming like a dare. I thought about Elijah's final weeks, the way he had looked at me sometimes with a strange tenderness, almost pity. The way he said, "If anything ever happens to me, don't look for answers at home." I had laughed then, thinking it was the medication talking. Now, the memory felt like a knife turned in my chest. I took the key and the letter and went upstairs. Our bedroom was a museum of a life that had ended 2 days ago. His robe still hung on the back of the door. His glasses were on the nightstand, folded perfectly. I sat on his side of the bed, clutching the letter like a relic. I tried to picture him writing it. Maybe in his office at night, hands trembling, knowing time was short. Maybe Vanessa was there. The thought made my stomach twist. I didn't want to believe it, but her eyes at the funeral, the way she looked at the casket, not with grief but with resolve, told me there was more between them than in-laws ever shared. Was it hatred, or was it something else entirely? The rain started then, tapping against the window pane like a steady whisper. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was Elijah's old watch, the one he hadn't worn in years. The engraving on the back read E+C, 1983. I pressed my thumb over the letters until it hurt. A noise downstairs made me freeze. A soft creak, as if someone had stepped on the wooden floor near the hallway. I waited. Nothing. Just the wind again. Still, I went down. Each step felt heavier than the last. The house smelled of wax and damp wood. I checked the door, locked. The windows, closed. But something was different. On the dining table, the letter lay where I'd left it. But the key was gone. My pulse thundered in my ears. I searched the floor, the chair, under the table, nothing. I retraced my steps to the study, the kitchen, the porch. Gone. For the first time, grief turned to fear. Someone had been inside. I stood there, trembling, clutching the edge of the table. Outside, a car engine started, faint but unmistakable. I ran to the window, just enough to see a pair of headlights disappearing down the street. I didn't see who it was, but in the passenger seat, I thought I caught a glimpse of blonde hair glinting under the streetlight. That night, I didn't go back to bed. I sat in Elijah's study until dawn, the letter in my lap, the words echoing in my head. Trust no one. When the first light broke through the curtains, I made a decision. Whatever this key opened, wherever it led, I would find it. And if Vanessa thought she could bury the truth with Elijah, she had underestimated the woman who had buried him. I hadn't slept when the sun came up. The house was washed in that colorless light that makes everything look a little unreal, like the world itself was holding its breath. The key was still missing, but the words in Elijah's letter refused to leave me alone. What you believed was yours never was. They repeated in my head like a curse. At 7, I called the bank. "Midland Trust," the voice said, cheerful, routine. I asked about safety deposit boxes, my voice shaky but controlled. When the clerk asked for the number, I whispered, 47. She paused, a small silence on the line. "Box number 47 is registered to a Dr. Elijah Thacker. Do you have the key and identification?" The words hit me like a pulse of cold air. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still for several seconds. Then I realized I didn't even know why I was trembling, from fear or anticipation. If the key was gone, I'd find another way. Elijah's attorney, Lawson, would have backup records, but something in me said no. Whatever this was, I had to see it alone. I dressed quickly, gray coat, hair pinned up. I didn't bother with makeup. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in days. The bus ride downtown was a blur of noise and faces. A mother arguing with her child, a teenager glued to his phone, an old man humming under his breath. Life was still happening, unbothered by my private storm. I envied them. When the bus stopped in front of the bank, my stomach tightened. I stood before the glass doors of Midland Trust, the same place Elijah had gone every Friday afternoon, claiming to check statements. I'd never questioned it. Love makes you lazy. Inside, the teller recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Thacker," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I managed. My voice came out smaller than I expected. "I need to access a box in my husband's name, number 47. She hesitated. "Do you have the key?" "I misplaced it, but I can prove I'm his wife." Her eyes darted toward a supervisor. After a brief discussion, she returned. "We'll make an exception. Please follow me." The carpeted hallway swallowed the sound of our steps. When we reached the vault, the teller turned the wheel and the heavy door opened with a sigh. The air inside smelled like metal and time. She led me to a small booth, then brought the box, long, flat, and cold to the touch. "Take all the time you need," she said, and left. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My hands hovered above the box, afraid of what they might find. I remembered the first time Elijah took me to this bank, how proud he was of the new account, how he said, "Security gives peace of mind." Peace, what a strange word now. I slid the box open. Inside, there were only 3 things: a brown folder, a sealed envelope, and a black and white photograph. The photograph was on top. I picked it up. My breath stopped halfway through my chest. Elijah, younger, maybe in his 40s, smiling, his arm around a woman I didn't know. She had soft features, kind eyes, and a quiet confidence. She wasn't glamorous, but there was warmth in her face. Behind them, a little girl about 3 years old, with light eyes and hair that curled just at the ends. Something in that child's expression made my stomach twist. The tilt of her chin, the way she looked at the camera, unafraid, a little defiant. I had seen that look before. In Vanessa. The photograph slipped from my fingers. I stared at it on the table, the edges curling slightly under the lamp's heat. I reached for the envelope next. The handwriting was Elijah's, last will and testament. The date was recent, only a month before he died. I unfolded the pages slowly, as if touching them might change the words. "I, Elijah Thacker, leave my estate to Serena Harper." The room seemed to tilt. The words blurred. Serena Harper. Who was she? A mistress? A business partner? The woman in the photo? My hands trembled so badly I had to set the papers down. I pressed both palms against the table to steady myself. It wasn't jealousy I felt, not exactly. It was betrayal, so old it had grown roots. Elijah, the man who scolded me for hiding small purchases, had been hiding a second life. The child in the photo, the woman, the will, and Vanessa. I remembered the way Vanessa had looked at the coffin, her eyes hard, her mouth steady. The way she'd slipped that envelope inside, careful, deliberate. Was she protecting him or exposing him? I gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. I tucked the photo into my coat pocket. My reflection in the booth's small mirror startled me, pale, haunted, older than I'd been yesterday. When I stepped out, the teller smiled politely. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Yes," I lied. "Everything's perfectly fine." Outside, the world was too bright. I blinked against the sunlight. The city kept moving, cars honking, people laughing. I stood on the steps, clutching the folder to my chest, feeling like a ghost in the middle of the living. I walked for blocks without knowing where I was going. My thoughts looped like a broken reel. Serena Harper, the girl in the photo, Vanessa. At an intersection, the light turned red and I stopped. Across the street, a bus passed by. In the window, I saw a flash of blonde hair. Vanessa, or someone who looked like her, sitting by the window, looking straight ahead. When the bus turned the corner, she was gone. I didn't chase it. I just stood there, the folder heavy in my hands, the name Serena Harper pounding in my skull like a drumbeat. When I finally made it home, the first thing I did was lock the door. I spread the photograph and the will on the table. The sunlight through the blinds cut them into pieces of light and shadow. My heart thudded in my chest, slow and deliberate. Elijah had lied to me. Vanessa had known. And somewhere out there, a woman named Serena Harper held the key to all of it. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears are for the end of a story, and I knew, deep down, that mine had only just begun. By the next morning, the house no longer felt like mine. Every photograph, every book, every piece of furniture suddenly looked like evidence in a crime I didn't understand. I'd spent half the night staring at the photograph, Elijah, the woman, the child, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it seemed. But truth has a smell, and it lingers, even when you try to ignore it. When the clock struck 9, I called Attorney Lawson. He'd handled our mortgage, Elijah's retirement, even the will, or at least the one I thought existed. "Mrs. Thacker," he said, his voice low and polite, "I was just about to call you. I wanted to make sure you were holding up." "I'm managing," I said, "but there's something I need to ask you in person." He agreed to meet that afternoon. Lawson's office sat above a bookstore downtown, a narrow space filled with paper, dust, and the faint smell of lemon polish, the kind of room where secrets like to settle. He stood when I entered, buttoning his jacket, his smile kind but cautious. "Celeste," he said, using my first name the way people do when they know bad news is coming, "please have a seat." I placed the brown folder on his desk. "I found this in Elijah's safety deposit box." His expression tightened. "You accessed it?" "I did, and I found this." He opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. I watched his eyes move across the page, calm at first, then narrowing, his lips pressing together. After a moment, he set the papers down. "Where exactly did you find this again?" "In a box marked 47. The handwriting's his, isn't it?" "Yes," Lawson said quietly. "That's Elijah's signature, no question." "So it's real?" He nodded slowly. "It appears to be." I sat back, my pulse pounding in my throat. "Then tell me, Mr. Lawson, who the hell is Serena Harper?" He didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "The name sounds familiar," he said. "Let me check something." He stood, crossed the room, and opened a tall filing cabinet that looked older than I was. Files whispered as he flipped through them. Then, halfway down the drawer, he stopped. "Here," he said softly. He laid a yellowed folder on the desk, brushing off the dust. On the tab, and faded ink, Harper, Serena. My heart lurched. Lawson opened it carefully. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, one official, the other handwritten. The top one was dated 1986. I read the header before he could even explain. Child Support Agreement, Dr. Elijah Thacker. The room went cold. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff you didn't know existed. Lawson cleared his throat. 39 years ago, Elijah agreed to pay monthly support to a woman named Serena Harper on behalf of her daughter. There's no record of a marriage, no joint property, just the payments. He hesitated. They stopped after 1994. I stared at the document, trying to make sense of the words. The numbers, the signatures, the way Elijah's handwriting slanted slightly to the right, it all screamed truth. So he had a child, I said, a daughter. It seems so. Do you know her name? He shook his head. That section's been crossed out, intentionally. Look. And there it was, a thick black line drawn through the child's name. The ink pressed so hard it had bled through the paper. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Lawson said quietly, "Celeste, I don't think Elijah meant for this to stay buried. If you found that will, it's because he wanted you to." I felt something between a sob and a laugh escape my throat. "You think this is some kind of gift?" He looked away. "Maybe a confession." I stood up and paced the room. "You've known him for 30 years, Robert. You must have noticed something." He sighed. Elijah was a private man, dedicated, at least professionally. But there were moments. What moments? When he'd sit in that chair, he pointed to the corner, and ask hypothetical questions about legal guardianship, inheritance, trust funds, I thought he was just being thorough. My fingers trembled as I held the folder. "He was planning for her," I whispered. "For that woman, for their child." Lawson hesitated. "Celeste, I know this hurts, but be careful where this leads. If Vanessa, if she's somehow connected to this?" I froze. He hadn't finished the sentence, but my mind did it for him. If Vanessa is the daughter. The photograph flashed before my eyes again. The little girl's light eyes, the same shade as Vanessa's, that defiant look. I gathered the papers and slipped them back into the folder. "Thank you, Robert, for your honesty." He stood, concerned. "Celeste, please, don't confront her yet. You need proof, not guesses." "Proof is exactly what I have," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. As I turned to leave, he said one last thing. "Elijah once told me something strange, that the people closest to him would one day become his greatest fear. I didn't understand it then. Maybe you will." Outside, the sky had turned a bruised color, somewhere between gray and blue. I walked slowly down the block, the folder pressed against my chest. Each step felt heavier, each breath colder. My husband had lived a second life. My daughter-in-law might be the proof of it. And if that was true, then the letter he left me wasn't just a warning. It was a confession wrapped in guilt. When I reached home, I sat in the car for several minutes before going inside. The porch light flickered, just like it had the night of the funeral. The air smelled of rain and wilted flowers. I opened the door. The house greeted me with silence again, that awful, endless silence that only the grieving and the betrayed can hear. On the kitchen table, the photograph still lay under the lamplight, Elijah smiling beside Serena and the little girl. I stared at the picture until the edges blurred with tears. Then I whispered, "Vanessa, what have you done?" But deep down, another voice answered, colder, older, and far more cruel. "No, Celeste, what have you ignored?" I don't remember the drive to Harold Linton's place. Only the sound of gravel under the tires and the way my hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, the photo of Elijah and that woman half visible through the paper. Every time I hit a bump, it slid closer to me, like the past refusing to stay still. Lawson had been hesitant to say more about Harold. He and Elijah were business partners years ago, he'd said, But their relationship ended badly. You should let it rest. But I couldn't. I'd already buried one truth. I wasn't about to bury another. The address he gave me led to the industrial district, the kind of place time forgot. Warehouses with broken windows, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement, the faint buzz of power lines. The sign on the gate was rusted but still readable. Linton Storage and Supply. I parked near the fence and got out. The air smelled of metal and rain. My heels clicked against the concrete, echoing louder than I liked. When I knocked, the sound rolled through the building like thunder. For a while, nothing. Then, slowly, the door opened. He was older than I expected. Thin, sharp-faced, his hair white but full, his hands steady despite the years. The first thing I noticed was the ring. Black stone, thick silver band, gleaming even in the dim light. "Mrs. Thacker," he said before I could speak, "I was wondering when you'd come." My mouth went dry. "You knew I would?" He smiled without warmth. "Elijah said you might. He was a man who prepared for things, even his own death." "Then you know why I'm here." "I do." He stepped aside, gesturing me in. The air inside was stale and cold. Old files and boxes lined the walls, each labeled in Elijah's meticulous handwriting. My chest tightened at the sight. "I kept some of his things after he left the firm," Harold said. "He didn't want them, but I had a feeling they'd matter one day." He motioned toward a chair. I didn't sit. "Tell me what you know." He studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Elijah didn't die of a heart attack." The words hit me harder than I expected. "That's impossible. The doctors saw what they were told to see." "What are you implying?" He leaned on his desk, his voice low but firm. "He was poisoned, Mrs. Thacker, the kind of poison that mimics cardiac failure if dosed slowly. I've seen it before." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "Poisoned by who?" He hesitated, then said, "By the person you think loved him." Vanessa's face flashed in my mind, her calm eyes at the funeral, her hand slipping into the pocket of Elijah's suit. My stomach twisted. "You're saying my daughter-in-law?" He raised a hand. "I'm saying she was involved, but not alone." "Then who else?" He turned to a filing cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a photograph. It was from some kind of company event. Elijah surrounded by men in suits, all of them smiling for the camera. "There," he said, pointing to the far right. I stepped closer. My gaze followed his finger to a woman standing slightly behind the men, elegant, reserved, half turned away from the lens. The name written on the back made my knees go weak. Serena Harper. I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's not possible. She's dead." His smile was thin and cruel. "You sure about that?" The silence stretched, heavy and thick. He continued, "Serena was smarter than Elijah gave her credit for. When he tried to cut ties, she vanished, changed her name, started again somewhere new. But she never stopped watching him." I swallowed hard. "You're telling me she's alive?" "I'm telling you," he said, "that nothing stays buried forever, especially not guilt." My hands trembled. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know who killed your husband." My mind was spinning. "You said Vanessa was involved. How?" He sighed, as though tired of keeping the secret. "Serena groomed her, fed her a story about abandonment, about how Elijah ruined her life. She filled that girl with hatred from the day she could walk. You think Vanessa married your son by chance? That was no coincidence. It was an introduction planned years ago." I felt sick. "You're saying Vanessa married Marcus just to destroy us?" to destroy him, corrected. You were collateral damage. My legs gave out, and I finally sat. This is insane. Is it? He asked softly. Or is it just the kind of truth no one wants to believe? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small vial. Inside was a dried residue, amber-colored. Elijah came to see me 2 weeks before he died, he said. Told me he was feeling strange, dizzy, fatigued, chest pain. He handed me this and said, if anything happens, tell Celeste the tea wasn't sweet enough. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a joke. The room tilted, my ears buzzed. I remembered that moment, Elijah sitting in his chair, a cup of tea in his hand, saying exactly that. Doesn't taste the same, but it's made with love. Vanessa had brewed it. Why didn't you go to the police? I whispered. He stared at me. And tell them what? That a dying man suspected his daughter's stepmother of poisoning him? They would have laughed. His tone hardened. You needed to hear it from me, not from a report. I stood, dizzy but determined. If Serena's alive, I'll find her. I'll find all of them. He smiled faintly. Then the story's not over yet. I turned toward the door, but his voice stopped me. One more thing, he said. If you go looking for Serena, don't go alone. She's not the same woman Elijah left behind. She's colder now, smarter, and she's been waiting. Outside, the air was heavy with dust and coming rain. I walked to my car on unsteady legs, clutching the folder against my chest. As I reached for the door handle, I glanced back. Through the warehouse window, Harold watched me, the black ring glinting on his hand. For the first time since Elijah's death, I felt something worse than grief. I felt hunted. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter, the will, and the photograph spread before me. I whispered the names aloud like an incantation. Elijah, Serena, Vanessa. Then I looked up into the darkened hallway and said the words that sealed everything that would follow. You thought you could hide from me, Serena Harper, but I'm still here, and I'm not done. It took me 3 days to plan the dinner. Not because I wanted it to be perfect, but because I wanted it to be controlled. Every fork, every napkin, every glass of wine, all of it had a purpose. Marcus thought it was about family. Vanessa thought it was about forgiveness. Only I knew it was about truth. I called them on a Thursday morning. Come by Saturday, I said. I'd like to have dinner together, just the 3 of us. I think Elijah would have wanted that. There was a pause on the line. Vanessa spoke first. That sounds lovely, Celeste. Her tone was warm, too warm. It'll be good for Marcus to relax. Yes, I said, it will. When Saturday came, I set the table with our old white china, the set we'd saved for holidays and anniversaries. The candles were unlit. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and nerves. I wore Elijah's favorite blue dress. I wanted her to notice. At exactly 8, the doorbell rang. Marcus stood there, flowers in his hand, looking tired but gentle. Vanessa beside him, in black again, always black, like grief was her favorite accessory. Come in, I said. My voice was steady. Vanessa looked around, smiling faintly. The house feels lighter, she said. Does it? I replied. I guess that's what happens when the truth starts to breathe. She blinked, the smile flickering for half a second before returning. You've redecorated. Just rearranged a few memories. Marcus kissed my cheek. Mom, it's good to see you smile again. I smiled because it was easier than explaining. Let's eat. We sat at the table. The silverware clinked softly, the air thick with unsaid things. I poured the wine. The same brand Elijah used to drink when he wanted to celebrate something he couldn't tell me about. At first, the conversation was polite. Marcus asked about the garden. Vanessa commented on the weather. We danced around the elephant in the room like it was an art form. When the silence finally came, it was almost a relief. I set my glass down. "Marcus," I said, "before we eat, there's something I'd like to share." He looked up, wary. "What is it, Mom?" "It's about your father." Vanessa's hand froze halfway to her glass. I rose from my chair, walked to the cabinet, and took out the folder, the one from the bank, the one she thought I'd never find. I placed it on the table between us. Vanessa's eyes darted to it and then back to me. "What's that?" "Proof," I said softly. Marcus frowned. "Proof of what?" I opened the folder, took out the photograph, and slid it across the table. Marcus picked it up, confused. "Dad?" he said. "Who's the woman?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Vanessa. Her lips tightened. Her eyes didn't blink. "Vanessa?" Marcus said. "Do you know her?" She didn't speak. "The woman's name," I said, "is Serena Harper." Marcus looked at me, then at his wife. "That name means nothing to me." "It should," I said, "because it's your wife's mother." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's face went blank. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa finally spoke, her voice low. "Celeste, you don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" I leaned forward. "You've been lying since the day you walked into this house." Marcus turned to her, his voice shaking. "Is this true?" Vanessa's eyes flashed, fear, anger, something darker. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Yes," she said, "it's true." The silence that followed felt like the world stopping. Marcus's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You lied to me?" "I told you who I was," she said evenly. "You just never asked who my mother was." I stared at her, unable to look away. "Why, Vanessa? Why all this?" Her calm cracked. "Because your husband destroyed my mother's life," she shouted. "Because while you were playing perfect wife in this perfect house, she was sewing until her hands bled just to feed me." Marcus's voice broke. "You used me?" Her eyes softened, just for him. "I loved you," she said, "but I also wanted him to pay." "By marrying his son?" I said. "By poisoning him?" Marcus turned sharply. "What?" Vanessa froze. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. I pressed on. "He didn't die of a heart attack, Vanessa. You made sure of that." "That's a lie." "Is it?" "You slipped the letter into his pocket at the funeral, the one that said, 'Trust no one.' You wanted me to find it, didn't you? You wanted me to follow the trail and drown in the same guilt that killed him." She stood, her chair falling backward with a thud. "You think you know everything, Celeste, but you don't. You don't know what he did." Marcus stepped between us. "Vanessa, stop." She ignored him. "He abandoned us. He promised my mother a new life and left her to die. He bought you this house while she was coughing blood in a rented room." Her voice cracked, raw and trembling. For a moment, I saw not the manipulator, but a broken child. "I'm sorry for what he did to her," I said softly. "But he's gone now. You've hurt the wrong people." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think this is about hurt? This is about justice." "Justice doesn't come from hatred. Neither does forgiveness." Marcus turned to her, tears in his eyes. "You killed my father." She met his gaze. I freed him from his lies. Then she grabbed her coat and walked toward the door. "You got what you wanted, Celeste, the truth. Congratulations. The door slammed so hard the candles flickered out. Marcus stood there, trembling. Mom, what do we do now? I didn't answer. I went to the table, picked up the photo, and stared at the little girl, her eyes too bright, her smile too proud. I think, I said, we start by finding her mother. The call came just after sunset. I'd been sitting in the dark, the photograph still on the table, when the phone rang, a sound so ordinary it startled me. Mrs. Thacker? The voice was male, deep, hoarse. Yes. This is Harold Linton. You might want to sit down. My pulse spiked. What now? I found her. Who? He didn't hesitate. Serena Harper. She's alive, and she wants to see you. The world went silent. Where? The Bayview Hotel, room 204, tonight. He paused. Don't go alone. Then the line went dead. I sat for a long time, staring at the phone, until I realized my hands were shaking. Serena Harper, the woman whose name had haunted every sleepless night since Elijah's funeral, was still breathing somewhere out there. I took Elijah's letter from the drawer and slipped it into my purse. If this was how the story ended, I wanted him to be there, even as ink and guilt. By the time I reached Bayview, the streets were empty. The old hotel loomed like a ghost of its former self. Cracked paint, flickering neon sign, windows that looked blind. Inside, the lobby smelled of old smoke and rain. The clerk barely looked up when I asked for room 204. He just pointed down the hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but my heart made enough noise for both of us. When I reached the door, I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, a voice said from inside, calm and certain, "Come in, Celeste. I was expecting you." The knob turned easily. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp near the window. The curtains were half drawn, swaying with the wind. A woman sat in a chair, her back to me, her white hair falling straight down like a curtain. Her hands rested on the armrests, thin but steady. "Serena," I said. She turned slowly, and for a moment, time broke. Her face was older, marked by years and sorrow, but unmistakable, the woman from the photo. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. "I didn't think I'd ever see you," she said. "I thought you were dead." She smiled faintly. Sometimes death is easier than being forgotten. I stepped closer. "Why now?" "Because lies rot when left alone too long," she said, "and yours have started to stink." I flinched. "Mine?" "You lived a life built on his lies," she said. "You wore the ring he bought with our pain." I clenched my fists. "You think I knew what he did to you?" "You didn't need to. You just had to look away." The words sliced deeper than I wanted them to. I opened my mouth to speak, but a noise behind me stopped everything. A sharp creak of floorboards, then the click of a gun being cocked. "Don't move," a trembling voice said. I turned slowly. Vanessa stood in the doorway, eyes wide, hands shaking around a pistol. Tears streaked her face, but her mouth was set in a hard line. "Vanessa," I said quietly. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say my name." Serena rose from her chair. "Daughter, please." "Don't call me that," Vanessa shouted, her voice cracking. "You don't get to now." The gun trembled. I could see her finger tightening on the trigger. "You both lied to me," she said. "He lied to all of us. You let him die with secrets, and now you stand here pretending to be the victims." Serena's voice was soft. I did what I had to do to protect you." Vanessa laughed, broken and raw. "Protect me? You poisoned him. You told me he ruined your life. You said he deserved it." Serena took a slow step forward. "Listen to me." "No!" Vanessa's scream filled the room. "You made me hate him. You made me hate them." Her hands shook so violently I thought the gun might go off by accident. I raised my palms. "Vanessa, look at me. You don't have to do this." Her eyes snapped to mine. "Don't you dare play innocent. You had everything, the house, the respect, the name, and you never paid for it." "I paid for it every day," I said. "You think I didn't feel him slipping away? The lies, the distance. I was his wife, not his accomplice." She hesitated. For a moment, I saw the little girl from the photograph, lost, furious, and starving for love. "Put the gun down," I whispered. "You've already hurt enough people." Her voice broke. "I can't. I don't know who I am if I stop." Then Serena moved. Just a step, but enough to break whatever fragile balance remained. "Vanessa, please," she said. "For once in your life, listen to me." The gun dropped to her side. She looked at her mother, tears streaking down her cheeks. "All my life, you made him the villain, and now I see it. You were worse." Serena's lips trembled. "I did it for you." "No," Vanessa said. "You did it because you couldn't forgive him, and now I'm just what's left of that hate." She let the gun fall. The metal hit the floor with a sound that shattered the silence. Serena rushed to her, pulling her into her arms. Vanessa sobbed, collapsing against her mother's chest. I stood there, frozen, the weight of everything pressing down. 40 years of lies, vengeance, and silence collapsing into one room. The door burst open. Police flooded in, Harold behind them. He looked at me, eyes heavy. "I called them," he said, "just in case." They took the gun, handcuffed Serena gently, and led Vanessa away, still crying, still whispering, "I'm sorry." When it was over, the room felt smaller. Serena turned to me as the officers guided her out. "Don't hate her, Celeste," she said. "She only carried what I taught her." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Then she said something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "It wasn't hate that killed Elijah," she whispered. "It was silence." And with that, she was gone. I stood alone in the half-lit room, the rain hammering against the windows, the curtains swaying like ghosts. For the first time, I felt something strange, not relief, not victory, just quiet, the kind of quiet that follows an explosion. 6 months have passed since that night at the Bayview Hotel. The police reports, the trials, the statements, all of it is now a blur, a distant echo of a storm that nearly swallowed me whole. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of Vanessa's sobs. Sometimes I imagine the gun going off, though it never did. I suppose that's what survival sounds like, a noise that never really stops. The newspapers called it the Thacker affair, a tragic story of love, betrayal, and inheritance. They wrote about it like fiction, as if grief could be packaged into neat paragraphs for public consumption. But the truth never fits into headlines. It stains you quietly, like ink spilled into water, spreading, fading, but never gone. Vanessa was sentenced to 20 years, not for murder. The toxicology report was inconclusive. The poison in Elijah's system was never proven fatal, but she was found guilty of fraud, identity theft, and document manipulation. Her mother, Serena, was placed under house arrest. Her health was too fragile for prison, though I sometimes wonder if the weight of what she carried was already punishment enough. Harold Linton disappeared from the public eye after testifying. The man with the black ring went back to whatever shadows he came from. Some ghosts prefer to stay hidden. And Marcus, my son, he hasn't been the same. The day they took Vanessa away, he fell to his knees in the front yard. "I don't understand, Mom," he said. "Why did all of this happen?" I didn't answer because I didn't know either. Hatred passes through families like a curse, invisible, inherited, and cruel. He moved away 3 months ago, calls me once a week. His voice sounds distant, careful, like a man afraid that words might break him. I don't blame him. Words broke us all. For a while, I thought of leaving the house. Every room felt like a memory I couldn't afford to keep. The chair where Elijah read the newspaper, the kitchen where Vanessa once smiled, pretending love. But one morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, I realized something simple. Running is just another kind of silence. And I had been silent long enough. So I stayed. I started repainting the walls, not to erase the past, but to remind myself that change doesn't always mean forgetting. I planted new roses in the garden, where the soil still smelled faintly of incense from the funeral. They bloomed brighter than before, as if life had been waiting for permission to return. Sometimes I sit on the porch at dusk, watching the sky turn that strange shade of violet Elijah used to love. It's in those moments that I talk to him, softly, without bitterness. I tell him about Marcus, about the flowers, about the quiet. I tell him that I'm no longer angry, not because he deserves forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. Last month, I received a letter from Attorney Lawson. Inside was a small yellowed envelope sealed in Elijah's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. It read, "Celeste, if this reaches you, then the truth has already done its work. I never loved Serena as I loved you. What happened between us was a mistake, one I carried like a sickness. But when I learned I had a daughter, I tried to make it right. Too late, too quietly. I thought silence would protect you, but it only condemned us all. If there is anything after death, I hope to meet you there, to tell you with my own voice what my cowardice kept me from saying. I loved you, always. Elijah." I read it again and again until my tears blurred the ink. I didn't forgive him right away. Forgiveness isn't a key you turn once. It's a door that creaks slowly, painfully, until it finally opens, not for the one who knocked, but for the one who waited inside too long. After that, I began to write, not to the police, not to the press, but to the women who might one day feel what I felt. I filled notebooks with my story. I wrote about grief that burns, about betrayal that breathes, about how silence kills more surely than poison ever could. And I wrote one letter I knew I needed to send. It was addressed to the prison, to Vanessa. I didn't write to accuse her or to ask anything in return. I simply wrote, "You were born in shadow, Vanessa, but that doesn't mean you have to live there. You were raised in hatred, but hate can end where you decide to let it go. Find your light, not mine, not your mother's, your own. You were not born to destroy. You were born to heal what the past stole from you." I don't know if she read it, but I had to send it because there are wounds only words can reach. 2 weeks ago, Attorney Lawson visited again. He brought another safety deposit box that had recently been transferred to my name. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. I was afraid it would be another secret, another storm. But I did. Inside were only 3 things: a black and white photo, Elijah, Serena, and Vanessa as a child, a small silver cross, and a note that said, If you're reading this, it means the truth is finally free. Thank you for taking care of everyone, even those who didn't deserve it. Forgive my silence. Now you can live without me. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled, a strange, quiet smile that came from somewhere deep, the place where pain used to live. It felt like Elijah's soul had finally let go of my hand. That night, for the first time in years, I slept through the night. And I dreamed of him, not sick, not broken, but young, standing under the rain, laughing the way he used to. He reached out his hand and said, "That's it, Celeste. Everything has been paid for." When I woke, the house was bright with morning light. The roses outside were open, heavy with dew. I made coffee, sat by the window, and for once, the silence felt gentle. I realized then that the opposite of grief isn't joy. It's freedom. Freedom to remember without drowning. Freedom to love without ownership. Freedom to exist without fear. My name is Celeste Thacker. I was a wife, a mother, a victim, and a witness. But more than that, I am still here. And this time, I live not to keep secrets, but to tell them.